Hello and welcome back. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm showing you how I painted this beautiful Lake District scene. It's a line and wash painting, painted with waterproof fine liners. Faber Castell artist pit pens are the ones that I use, but any waterproof fine liners will do. This is the beautiful photograph from Pixabay that inspired me, and I shall leave a link in the description below to that. I'll slightly speed up my process today of sketching out and simplifying the scene first in pencil and then going over the pencil sketch with my fine liners. I do like the line and wash technique. This is a demo from a little while ago, one of my favourites, and I've slightly edited it to speed up the process of the line work, and I've also included better photographs of the finished painting for you at the beginning and the end, because this was when I was really struggling with the light in my studio, so it's not great. I'm hoping that this year I can begin to work out how to improve the lighting in my studio in general. I'm not very good at tech things. I sort of limp on and get on with it, but it's not really my forte. But I'm sort of looking into how I can light the studio in a slightly more even way. So what I'm doing first, as I said, is simplifying the scene, putting in the main elements. I don't have to include all the details, but just whatever I feel is important and helps to keep a nice balanced composition for the scene. I really like these beautiful tall coniferous trees on the left, and the little group of buildings are really attractive. Always try and keep things really simple, especially if you're a beginner. Just look at the basic shapes of the buildings and try and simplify them down like I'm doing here. And then make sure that you're happy with the shapes in pencil first, that you make any adjustments which you can then erase before you go in with your waterproof fine liner, because of course fine liners are permanent once dry. Sketching and drawing is such a foundational skill that underpins good watercolour painting, especially loose watercolour painting. So the line and wash technique is a great way to practice those skills. It's a great way to give structure to the painting as well, so that once the structure is in with the waterproof line work, it's just a matter of following your roadmap and putting in your beautiful washes and then finishing off with a little bit of well-considered detail. So now that I've finished my line work, I'm going to have a cup of coffee and just leave it for 5 minutes to make sure that everything's fully dry, because then it will become completely waterproof. I've now got my board at an angle of about sort of 30 to 45 degrees, and that means that gravity will help me paint when I paint my sky in first, wet in wet. So I'm using a 1.5 inch Princeton Aqua Elite Mottler brush, or any large wash brush will do, to wet the sky all over, and I'm going to cut around my farm buildings so that I can keep them a little bit paler. So if they're dry, they should resist the run, the gravity run of the wet in wet wash, as the paper is at a slight slope. And then I can decide how much shadow I want to paint onto the buildings a little bit later when I see how things look. This is a mixture of ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt blue and a tiny bit of indigo. I'm just working around, trying to just allow the white paper and the different shades of the paint to give me my sky. Painting around my little cloud areas. I don't want too many clouds because I want to keep the sky reasonably simple so that the actual landscape itself dominates in this one. The sky is like the sort of backdrop for the landscape in this case. So painting straight through my trees. That means when I eventually put a little bit of foliage on, you'll still be able to see the sky through there. And you'll probably notice that I'm not putting in the sort of the sun and the sunburst through the trees that was in the photograph, which, while was very attractive, was not an easy effect to achieve. And I don't think it's necessary here. I think a nice plain cloudy blue sky will be enough. Just going to add a little bit slightly stronger blue across the top and in parts, and everything should soften and diffuse nicely as it dries naturally, and hopefully give me quite a nice, very simple but realistic looking sky. So now for the landscape. To mix my beautiful sort of earthy English green tones, I'm using various mixtures of my blue, which is cobalt blue and ultramarine blue, with a little bit of cad yellow, lemon yellow, and a little bit of raw sienna, and maybe the odd bit of burnt sienna every now and again, just to darken it up. And I'm trying to cover most of the land using my directional brush strokes in the direction of the land, and trying to make sure that I leave enough unpainted paper at this stage to put in some paler, sort of more yellower greens, so that I can have my bright sunlight showing through, and then some slightly paler greens, but still keeping a nice variation in the hues across, to give the sense of distance in the background. Those paler colours will help that land to recede a bit further back, so that we get depth and distance and aerial perspective. I'm still using my Watercolor brush, but you can use any brush if you prefer a round brush for this sort of work, but try and use the largest round or mop that you can get away with. Of course, you could use a Harky brush, a flat brush, any brush really, whatever you're comfortable with using for this sort of work. And now this is my brighter green. It's just had a little bit of lemon yellow added to it, just to brighten it up a little bit across the centre of the page, and then I'll eventually get some shadows in there. You can see that I've avoided the path because I'm going to put that in a sort of a more neutral grey colour. Building up, just dipping back into my different shades of green, and maybe a little bit of burnt umber as well, just to put a bit of shadow here and there. Then softening the edges of the path back with a clean, damp squirrel mop. Then I'm going to mix up a nice neutral grey using my blues, my burnt sienna and my raw sienna till I get a nice grey colour. And then this is a 3/4 inch flat brush, and I'm just putting in my path, making sure that it's narrow in the distance by the gate and comes out sort of wider towards the foreground, to give us that sense of accurate perspective, and again more depth and distance. And of course, all the time I'm painting, everything's slowly drying out, but it's still damp, it's still workable. And so this is a slightly richer, drier mix of burnt umber with a little bit of the green added to it, so I can just darken up where I've got grasses and clumps of reeds and brambles in the foreground, and sort of darken up some of the shadows under the trees, along under the fence and below the farmhouse. Putting a little bit of variation into the hue, into the hills in the background. Not too much, but just enough, again, to give the illusion of distant trees growing off of that hillside. Be careful you don't go into your damp wash with a wetter brush than the page. If you do that, you'll end up with cauliflowers and runbacks. So just dab the brush onto a paper towel or a sponge if you think it's too wet, and keep the paint mixture nice and dry, and everything will still soften and diffuse, and so those darks will become fully integrated with the wash and should look really natural. So now I'm going on to my buildings, and I've mixed a nice grey, again from my cobalt blue, raw sienna and burnt sienna, so nice grey on the roofs. And then working on the rest of the land, dipping into grey and the greenish brown, just to add more shadows and to just drop some shadows from the trees, from the pine trees, following the slope of the hillside into the hillside, so that I get those shadows sort of softening slightly into the grassy area, because the grass here is quite long and overgrown. It's not a lawn, so I need to be able to sort of lose those shadows a little bit onto the land, but still have them sort of helping the composition and helping the painting to read correctly as a sort of a sloping hillside. This is quite a watery mix of ultramarine blue. It was a little bit too thick, so I've just removed a bit of it so that I can have that cottage gable end sort of standing out really nicely, but still in shadow. And now really darkening up with a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to get a nice dark colour, and so that I can drop my shadows in just before I leave things to dry, and so that the shadows themselves will diffuse and soften. A lot of my hard edges have already been created by the fine liner, so when I'm painting a line and wash, I'm not looking to get too many hard edges. Maybe a bit of dry brush at the end once it's completely dry, but as I say, with the line work here, that provides us with our hard edges, so most of our washes need to be sort of lost and found and softly diffused. But just before it dries, I can use the corner of a plastic card, my fingernail, or a palette knife to scrape through the paint and reveal the white paper underneath, and that gives me some nice sort of hard edge, stronger grasses in the foreground. I want to be careful not to overdo this, but just to put a few of those in. They will partially soften back, but give me that nice little bright highlight in the foreground, again helping to lead the eye into and through the painting. So that's most of the painting finished. I'm going to leave it to dry completely. I want to add a glaze, so it has to be bone dry, so I'm going to leave it for a few hours. The glaze will just be very light glaze of lemon yellow, which will brighten up the sunny patches on the ground. So here it is, it's dried back. I'm really pleased with the way it's looking. I just need to brighten up the sunshine on the grass a little bit more. So I've mixed up a watery mixture of lemon yellow, and I'm just pulling it across the landscape, across the sort of centre of the landscape on either side of the trees, so we get that nice bright sunlit look. This is something, using a glaze, that really helps to exploit the beauty, the transparent beauty of watercolour, because we'll be able to see the green underneath still, but this lemon yellow will just highlight certain parts and give them that sunlit look. We can do that on the distant hill as well, quite lightly, and when that dries back, as I say, it should just add that beautiful bright layer, so we can still see the greens and the browns underneath, but should just give that sunlit look and just pull the painting together. The brush that I used there was a size 14 Escoda Perla synthetic round brush, and now I'm just going to use a really small 1/4 inch cotton flat brush and a little bit of cobalt blue to paint in a nice door on the barn. And then back to my 3/4 inch flat brush and a little tiny bit of burnt sienna, almost invisible touches of sort of this orangey brown on the chimney, and just a few little touches here and there around the buildings, sort of a subtle way of drawing the eye as this sort of brick red colour stands out and complements the green. And now the final thing is mixing up using my grey mixture and a very dry brush, and carefully adding dry brush twigs at the end of these pine branches to give that really distinctive look. Just sort of scratching away at the texture of the paper with the dry brush to create these marks. And you can see that straight away my trees are now looking a lot more three-dimensional, a lot more convincing, but still looking quite wintry. As this is a sort of late winter, early spring scene. Just adding a little bit more of an illusion of distant trees and bushes on that far slope. Just keeping it quite pale so it doesn't come forward too much, but just to add enough detail to sort of balance out the rest of the composition. And then finally, using my grey mixture to drag a bit of dry brush across the length of the path, just to strengthen up the tone a bit in the foreground and along the path. And then another layer, just deepening the tone or hue on those roofs. And I'm happy with that. I'm going to call that finished. So here it is with the tape removed. Please excuse the bad light in my studio. I'm working on that at present, but I'll just show you a photograph of how it looks in real life. So I'm really pleased with the way the painting turned out. And I hope this demonstration has been helpful for you, and that you'll be able to take some of these ideas across into your own painting practice. Please leave us a like or a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It's free to do, and it really helps with our reach. In other words, it lets the YouTube algorithm know that people are enjoying this video, so hopefully we'll push it out so that even more people see it. So thank you so much to everybody that supports this channel via Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel, then please follow any of the links below. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.